Good evening. Welcome everyone. It's IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and your premier news program in the world for getting real, practical spiritual advice for your everyday life. So, first, before we get started, down below, like and share tonight's episode with any fellow spiritual seekers or others who might be able to benefit from tonight's conversation. And in theory, that should be nearly everyone, because this is a very sort of inflamed topic tonight. So please do that and follow us on social media, ikya.official, here on YouTube, plus Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Now, before we get started tonight, we want to ask everybody, politics, take it and put it to the side. Emotions, try to let them relax. We all know that the situation in the Middle East with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is inflamed, intensely inflamed. And we all can, get filled with hormones and want to be right, want to judge, and want our political views to be heard. That is not tonight's discussion. Tonight we are lifting our perspective. So we all need to pull into ourselves and upward. So lift your perspective, relax the politics and emotions, because tonight we are going to explore the role of the Jewish culture and the Jewish people in our human evolution and how they've come to this unique position in our human society and what lessons they have to teach us about our own spiritual unfoldment of potentials. So it's really actually a beautiful and fascinating topic, but it requires that we go higher. So please, while we ask the question and transition to IKYA, starting our conversation, in yourself now, go into your center, raise your consciousness, relax politics and emotions, and we will start tonight's conversation with the question we posed. IKYA, what is it about the Jews?
A whole lot. I love this planet, and I love all people. And, all cultures, all ethnicities, all different variations of gender, and all different ways of being human. And I hope you do too. It's such a fascinating culture. The Jews are extremely good at everything they do, right? 22% of everyone having received a Nobel Prize are Jewish, right? They do so well in whatever they put their mind to. And this is really what we're going to investigate and figure out, how can we do the same? And then looking at how they got there, because it's really fascinating. And some of the reasons are the opposite of what you would think. So, the starting point for this is that suffering and pain can actually be productive, because this is truly the key. When you look at Jewish history, it's then filled with all of that. And it really started in Rome. When you go back, when they kind of made the official Bible and meant making Jews the villain in the story, because Rome was at that point at war with Jews. So it's a very important narrative. And basically since then, the Jews have been, chased, persecuted, all of that. And the story kind of stayed, right? All good stories need a villain. Right, so as Christianity grew, you have Jesus as the hero, and then Jews as the villain, and it's captivating. What happened over time in Europe, for instance, was that they were not allowed to own businesses. Right, they were really not allowed to do anything, to have productive work. So what happened then is that they had to survive. So they figured out, okay, well, we're allowed to do finance. We're not allowed to do banking. They found loopholes. So they went into banking, they became intellectuals, they became artists, and over time they also became scientists. Right? It's simply because they were denied the right to have kind of normal jobs. They figured out a way to do something else. And this is, what they also learned already after like 1,000 years of this. So they're really, the embodiment of the old saying that, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. But they take it a step further because they're today even producing the lemons, right? So that's really their thing. But we'll look at some of these mechanisms, because why they're so creative is not only because they were kind of forced into finding different types of work to survive. It's also that creativity is mainly a survival skill. It's not about painting. It's not about doing art. It's part of the mutation of the mind when we are stressed. Now, I often explain this when it comes to evolution of all life forms. All evolution normally starts with a change in the environment, and then that causes stress to the life form. And then the life form will go through the process of mutation, which means random things will happen both genetically and in every possible way, so that that life form may try to figure out a way how to get past this or adapt to that new reality. Because it's not like a life form will sit down and have a meeting and workshop their way through whatever has changed, right? It's stress. Stress causes mutation. So most of the mutations are completely unproductive and they will die out. For a life form, this happens over a very long time, right? So at the end, there will be strategies that randomly seem to work, and that will become dominant. This is what creativity is. It's also the curiosity of trying new things out, but it comes from stress, right? So when you have a culture that's been subjected to stress for a very long time, it will do something to you also genetically. It will do something to you, like in the way you think and behave as well. You will build a culture around this. So it means you will become more creative because you have to. You have to find new pathways. You have to try new things. You have to develop your imagination. It's simply survival. And it's the same thing, I was saying, like, great art comes from great suffering, right? And it's part of, when you look at our own patterns, because this is also what we will really focus on today, how we can use the Jewish culture as a mirror to activate some of the same process and learn what they have learned successfully as a culture. The thing is, as long as we're comfortable, we don't grow. As long as things work, we are lazy, because we are lazy beings. We're supposed to. When something works, we're just supposed to keep doing it. Because then survival will be repeating whatever is good. And when it's kind of not there anymore, because of change, then we will have to find something else. Then we will be triggered, but only then. So it also means that when we are being pushed beyond our comfort, we will grow, because we will be trying out new strategies more frequently, right? When we change and adapt and build a life, it's simply because we've tried out a lot of strategies, right? If figure out what works, and we do that, and we try something else. When we are comfortable, we don't do that. So we stay in the same place, and we do not grow as people. We do not develop our intelligence, right? So again, in their culture, because of their history, that culture has become really good at trying new things, adapting fast. There are so many things that are important in the culture. Like, what you need to understand is walking on two legs is not really part of our genetics. It's not part of our DNA yet. The same thing with speech. It's not something we do. It's something we learn through our culture, right? So culture is there as a kind of top layer. We have the basic biology in our DNA and genetics, and then we have culture, which is basically what we learn, and then gradually the best practices will become our genetic programming. So culture is extremely important when it comes to finding best practices for survival. And the Jewish culture is maybe the best example of that practice and how they've been then cultivating their focus. When it comes to comfort, right, often we think that we know what we need. Right? Often what we do is say, like, I need this, I need that, it has to be this way, it has to be that way, and then I can blossom, I can flourish. That's a big fat illusion, because you only know what you need based on repetition. All your needs, all your understandings about yourself and life is what you've done so far. So when you say, I know what I need, you should add to be doing exactly the same as I'm doing. All your needs are not connected to growth. It's connected to repetition. This is why you know what you need. It's like if you bake the same cake every day, you know what ingredients you need. You have no idea what you need if you're trying out a recipe you haven't even found yet. Right? So part of being comfortable is that we get even more connected to our needs. And then we use that to stand still. When in the culture where people have been kind of chased around and have to adapt and go to new countries, all of that, they learn to bake new cakes, right? They become open to new ingredients, new ways of thinking, new ways to do things. And also through that, they discover more of their own identity, right? It's the typical thing, for instance, when many people go to live abroad, the classical thing to do is that you find people from your original country and you clump together, right, and eat your national dishes and, sing your songs, whatever, but it's that. We have a tendency to do that when we are in a new environment because this is how we feel safe. Right? So when you do that, think of what happens to a culture when that happens on a regular basis. You become even more aware of who you are because you stand out. Right? So, if you're German, right, and let's say you go to South Africa, you will become even more aware of what it means to be German. Right? Or if you're Japanese and you go to Brazil, you will look very Japanese in that very moment, right? It's that, and you become aware of yourself also by saying, this is who I am, this is who I'm not. So when you have a culture that for a couple of thousand years now have had to adapt and kind of move around, they become extremely aware of who they are and who they are not. So it's mainly when we are in a hostile environment, and we can define that in many different ways, but just think of being in that space, you become more aware of what kind of stands out, how you are different. And then you can hold on to that. Just like your national identity when you go somewhere else, all of a sudden that may become even more important to you. It's an excellent example also with immigrants. For instance, you can have Pakistani families moving to the United States, and some of them will hold on to how Pakistan used to be when they first moved. So they're even more Pakistani now than the people actually living in Pakistan because they've moved on, right? It's more modern, it's like all of that. So we become even more our kind of original identity, and the Jews have been doing that. It's also been important because as they have spread out, what keeps them together is that sense of identity. right? But that also over time will create an enormous force, an enormous sense of we, that we are connected, we're on the same team, we're in this together, we have to survive together, right? And that is quite unique. So, they have been, as a culture, when you look at it from afar, it's interesting that all the pain and suffering and everything that they've been subjected to has actually refined them. Look at, for instance, intelligence. Intelligence, like there are many different forms of intelligence. All intelligence is basically problem solving. And what we're seeing in our civilization today is that we're getting less intelligent because we have fewer problems. And we just want things to work. We just want to push a button and it should work. And if it doesn't, we just like whine and complain. We're not solving any problem because it's not up to us anymore. So we get less and less intelligent and more emotional. When we're faced with hardships, we become more intelligent. Right? Every person will normally, based on their kind of starting point, they will have the ability to kind of fluctuate about 20 points of IQ based on how they're stimulated. So it's not a constant thing, but it will have it in us. So we can basically maximize our intelligence potential by having more problems to solve if we actually want to solve them. We can also go into victimhood, which means that we will not be solving anything because we will just be sobbing. And one of the interesting things here is that the way to not go into the victim state is by going into the emotions, going into the history, going into all of that. Jews own their history. They own their suffering and pain, right? In many ways, the Jewish faith are about like two things. They're like basically rituals and practices, and then remembering history. That is how you build identity. And when your identity is resilience, you've shown that through history, you become also aware that I have an obligation to my ancestors because they've gone through all of this. They did all of this, and now I'm the next generation. I have to keep going. There are expectations, there are obligations, because you see yourself as a part of a culture, not just as an individual. Right? And that builds strength. That identity is extremely important. And this is like one of the things we see in especially the Western culture today, right? We're so focused on the individual, and we have set ourselves free from often like family and ancestors and all of that. We just want to define ourselves. There are many good things to say about that, but most people use it to be lazy and entitled and complacent and just complain about things because I'm so important, right? History and kind of group identity can give you context and understand, like, who am I? Why am I here? Right? And it's that. So it means that Jews will be brought up in an environment where they already feel purpose. And when you look at our modern take of I'm just being me, those people often have a sense of purpose lacking from their life. Purpose is basically the human brain understanding I'm part of something greater than me. This is why we're better when we fight for something. It's better when we fight for our survival. It brings out the best in us. That's when we collaborate. That's when we can see past our petty little things and conflicts. We focus on the bigger issues at hand and how to solve them, right? intelligently so we can survive. So we have in our culture a desperate lack of purpose. But when you look at your history and family, and you see, this is me. I'm an individual, but I'm also a collective being, and this is greater than me. I have a cause. And the greatest cause as a Jew is the survival of the Jewish culture. Right? So from an evolutionary perspective and a survival perspective, it's genius. Right? It's like it's the holy grail of purpose. Because often what we do, I want to find myself. How can that possibly benefit our civilization? Right? And it's all of that. It's not connected to anything. So it's not, we lack context. We lack how to place ourselves in a productive, purposeful kind of framework. The Jews are born with that. They're taught it. Their religion is this. So Jews will, more than most people, have a sense of purpose through their culture, through their family, through their religion. And it's expected as part of the Jewish survival that you get best. You become the best person at anything you do. Because remember, when you have your ancestors doing this, and you have survived, you have endured. You know, they endured the Holocaust. Well, you can endure college. Right? It's that. It raises the bar ever so slightly, right? And when you have not just the Holocaust, but you have like a whole history of that, it builds resilience, but also the willingness to really push yourself because you're standing on the shoulders of our forefathers. We have completely lost that in our culture, right? It's just, I want to just do me, blah, blah, and you're basically standing in mud up to your neck, right? And this is why many people are not able to really do anything of importance, because it has to be greater than you. Fulfilling you is a waste of time. Fulfilling just you is taking energy from the world. It's not purposeful. It's just selfish. And people who do that end up being very depressed. When we are happy as beings, and you can recognize that in yourself, your happiness is always connected to doing something for someone else. When you feel purposeful, I've actually done something of importance for someone else, for my family, for the world. You can find a political cause or spiritual cause, whatever, but when you feel you're taking part in something beyond you, that triggers a different consciousness and triggers a different energy, and it changes your brain chemistry, because this is how we survive. As a life form, we have survived because we collaborate, because we work together. It started with early tribes, early packs, when humans were still apes, and it's just continued. The success of humans have always been working together. And that is always setting kind of the interest of your tribe or group before your own individual needs and interest. Right? If they're the same, great, but if you have to choose, it's always that. In most families throughout human history, it's all been the same. The family interest has to come before the individual interest, because it's the survival of the family as a whole. Right? The Jewish culture is this. And it means you survive. Right? And you're taught as a child to kind of be part of this journey. Most people today in our culture, they do not feel purpose. They're not doing anything purposeful. And then we self-medicate, and then we think that, you know, just money and things can fill that hole, and it can't. It really can't. And then we become vicious because we're self-centered. We think, I need to focus even more on myself, and that will make me happy. And of course it doesn't. We all know it. But our culture in the West is completely off the rails at this point. We need to go back to more kind of classic values, because that's how we operate as humans. We can reinvent them, but I advise people today to go back to more classic values. That's how we also find purpose. So the Jewish culture has always been really good at all of this. Now, also when it comes to developing intelligence, there's something interesting, is that unless we then are faced with challenges, we stop. Right? We need to keep going. And this is also why we see people who are truly intelligent, they never stop learning. They keep going. Doesn't matter how old they are, they keep studying. Because it's an insatiable kind of thirst of the mind. If you want to develop your intelligence and your consciousness, you have to keep learning. And what happens when you figure out horizontal survival again and you become comfortable, that switches off. What smart people will do is they begin to work on their consciousness. Because spiritually, we figure out how to make our horizontal life, which is, the incarnated life, how to make that work. But we do not stop. So what happens then, you can see this in all spiritual traditions, instead of like pondering about your personal problems, you start thinking about the universe. You apply your skills at problem solving to how to understand life, how to understand the universe, how to understand a concept like God and love and whatever it is. So we keep going. And that will also keep kind of feeding your intelligence and make you better at things. So this is the same thing. When you decide to develop a skill and go in a direction and you want to push it, you keep developing your skills and your intelligence, which is also why, Jews are considered to be more intelligent, especially the Ashkenazi Jews, as many of you know, how as a group, the highest measured, I think, intelligence of humans so far. But it's simply because of this, right? And I think some of the things that in our subconscious will always fascinate us about Jews is that they represent both the worst and the best. Whatever they do, they go all in. They don't half-ass anything, right? So they represent in many ways the absolute best of humanity. They can also represent the absolute worst. They have a wide spectrum. So they really kind of squeeze the lemon for what a human can be. But they're always interested in figuring out how far can we go in the human potential, right? And for instance, that when it comes to some of these kind of successes, remember, like whatever the Jews do, they have a tendency to go to the top because they expect more. They're part of this. They have this programming, and we don't. Right? So we just try things. Oh, that did not fulfill me. They're on a mission, and so should we be. This is what we need to learn, and we can talk more about that. But then you see very successful Jews in everything, right? And then, of course, lazy people create conspiracies because they're not doing it. So when you see someone successful and think, well, they didn't work, it must be something, blah, 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 because I could have done that if it wasn't for. These are always the people who create conspiracy theories. And when Jews are really good at anything, because they have a culture that will foster talent and intelligence and push you, they will all push each other together. We have completely lost this. This is why they're so successful. They're on a mission, they have purpose, they have culture, they have history, they have identity. All of that is telling them to keep moving. Because even, and back to the stress, back to creativity, even when a Jew is on top, he or she will have to keep fighting. Because then you have the conspiracy theories, you have to justify why you are there. So we're still fighting which causes more stress and will keep you kind of sharp, will keep you reminded of your history and the suffering. So you'll have to keep going because you have to prove yourself. It never stops. While most people in our culture, when they reach a level of success, whoa, I can live the life now. You stop the mission because you're focused on your own needs. For a Jew, they are always representing. They are always aware that they are Jews. So they can never let go of it. And it's really fascinating to see that all of these kind of markers, we have lost them. And the fascinating thing is this has developed because everybody has tried to kill them. Right? But it means survival skills will only develop fully when life is at stake. Right? So they're never comfortable. They're always hungry. And it's fascinating to see what that can do. It's not, this is not, I'm not trying to inspire you to try to kill each other, but it's looking at what we can learn from our own suffering, right? From our own history, from our own pain. And to use that, right?
So we had a question from Germany about this exact cycle you're talking about, that the better that Jewish people have gotten at everything, the easier it is to make up conspiracy theories about them being involved in the, behind everything, so to speak. Then, people who aren't Jewish want to kill them because of the conspiracy theories. So there's always that lingering question, and so I'm just going to put it out there early tonight, that lingering question. There's got to be something to those conspiracy theories, right?
Well, we should all pray that they are true. Because when they are the smartest, most competent people, most hardworking, most successful, why wouldn't we want them to run the show? They're better than all of us put together. They prove it again. Why wouldn't we want this to be true? We should really hope that it is. Right? They've been the driving force in bringing the world forward in every aspect of human life. There are Jews on top everywhere because they are better. They work harder. They have a culture that fosters talent and intelligence. We're consumers. We should really hope that they're running the show. Because it means that they are on a mission, they have purpose, they have intelligence, they have a sense of history. Everything we have lost. So we should really hope so. But in reality, no. It's not how it works. The thing is, unfortunately, when you have a very strong sense of your identity and who you are and your culture, and you know that no matter what you do, you are a Jew. Of course you communicate with, your culture, right? Because it's not like you have Zoom meetings. It's not like that, but you have a very strong sense of who you are and like the culture you belong to. And that will have the networks through family and through like all of that. So once you reach success, your community will take part in it. Because when you become a success, normally it's not just due to you. It's your family, it's your culture, all of that. So they're all kind of taking part in it, right? And because there's so many successful Jews, yes, they're part of the same culture. And of course, like through that, they, in a way, all, spend time together and talk together, right? That's not a conspiracy. It's like belonging to one family. And if you think of it, that's also good. Because it means people on top in different industries can actually talk together and have a connection beyond what they're doing because they're shared values. And if you look at a core value of the Jewish culture, it's survival. They're better at survival than anyone else, right? They have so many core values that are truly important to our civilization. Yes, they've had an enormous impact And we should be so grateful for that. And we should learn from it and not see it as a threat. But of course, again, when you have a lot of people everywhere being very successful, yes, they will be in communication through their families and culture. It doesn't mean that they're scheming. But remember also when our culture has, and still has, it's very childish, but still make up all these stories about the Jews, right? It also means that they have to defend themselves. They have to also, to a certain degree, kind of scheme and plan and do this or that because they can only trust Jews. It's the same thing, for instance, when you look at the LGBTQIA+++, a lot of them are just, a lot of queer people, they prefer being around queer people because they can share the story, they can understand. And they support businesses, like all of that, right? Christians can do the same. If you're a member of the same church, often you will support their businesses and this. Why shouldn't Jews do the same? They just happen to be better at it because they've been practicing for 2,000 years. Right? So when you look at it, yeah, this is conspiracy, but it's just like they're doing what we are all doing. They're just better at it. So this is where it's all coming from. Right? And of course, it doesn't mean that like all Jews are the best people. They're also best at being the worst. So it means, of course, a lot of Jews have done absolutely horrific things. Why shouldn't they? They're humans just like everybody else. But it's trying to look beyond the stories to see how is this actually working? Why did they get there? And what can we learn? Because that, to me, is the most fascinating part we will be diving into soon. Mm-hmm.
We have a question in the audience.
Yes. Is there can you see a difference between the Jews that are just like Jews in a relative kind of Jews, or the ones practicing more their religion and rituals?
Well, I would say that it's interesting that the culture and the religion is not really separated, because the religion is so much connected to remembering the past, right? So when you look at a lot of their holidays and all that, it's so much to do with remembering the past and not forgetting and all of that, which then enhances the identity and like knowing where you come from, what your obligation is, all of that. So even when you're not really kind of practicing a lot, you're still part of the culture, right? It's an identity, because also when you're a Jew, the rest of the world will kind of label you, right? So that means that, yeah, you will have to embrace it because you're part of it and the world will interpret you through that, right? So that can be both empowering once you own it. This is what they had to do. This is how they have kind of crystallized their culture based on always having to move around, being chased. They become so aware of who they are and how to navigate and how to kind of like, and they've brought that into business. They brought that into everything, right? So basically, the world-hating Jews taught Jews how to do this because it's how they could survive, right? So it means when they want to go to the top, they know how to do that, right? And it's not a conspiracy. It's basically that in their culture, they have the skill set. And it's wonderful. We should all learn from that and try to see, okay, how can we learn from our own suffering, from our own pain? One thing that is really fascinating about pain and suffering, if you include all of that into one thing, is that it can sharpen the mind. I've seen it so often that you can have a person, anxiety and fear, indecisiveness, this or that, and not being able really to get their life going and just seeing what happens, always late, and then shit hits the fan for real. And it happens for a long time. You get so exhausted that you just you start making decisions. You start cutting through your own crap. You can't have long conversations about nothing. You want to get to the point. You become more confrontational, more direct, and you get results. Try that for 2,000 years and see what happens, right? It's that, right? And also what they've done, which is so wonderful, they own their pain. It's part of their storytelling. It becomes part of the identity, but not as just the victim. They tell the story of how we have survived, how we endured, the successes we've had. It's that. So the identity is like, I will survive anything. That endurance, and that you have an obligation to endure, right? So they don't give up. We often give up if we feel bad because we think, right, we're so obsessed with short-term gratification, right? And this is the big problem with our civilization now, everything about instant gratification. And it brainwashes us to choose short-term result over long-term goals. You can't have both. So it's like, for instance, the typical thing when we overeat, right? We don't think, we can have the thought, oh, I'm getting fat, but this is yummy, right? And we choose that. And we do that in every single aspect of our lives. We just go for the instant gratification. When you have the framework of your history, of your ancestors, of your journey collectively, and who you are and what's expected and where to go, you will choose that. Means you will not be as easily sidetracked by instant gratification. You can do that, but you have a better balance. In our civilization, we completely lost it. Everybody just wants instant gratification all the time. And they're willing to give away all their long-term goals if it means that you can feel good now. Long-term goals means you're choosing to not feel good now, to not get those reward chemicals, because you want to do something greater. And that's the same kind of brain functions as purpose. So when you have a culture that fosters that way of thinking, it's easier to set long-term goals and say, well, yes, I know getting to my goal, I will suffer, but I will endure. Right? Do you start to see how this is kind of working, how wonderful it is, and what we are lacking? Because we can set a goal and we're dreaming about it, and then we take a course in how we can just manifest. That's what we're doing. We want it to be instant, we want to feel, because I deserve it, because I'm a 10 out of 10. It's that. And we think that if it takes work, then it's the universe telling me that it's wrong. It's that, right? In the Jewish culture, that you will slap you around because it's not acceptable. But when you are used to long-term goals, we're taking like several thousand, you are able to think in long lines. Collective consequence, individual consequence, everything has consequence. You can set long-term goals and you can say, I want to get to the top. You will not stop. You will be prepared for failure, for punishment, right? For suffering and pain. And so, yeah, that's part of it. I'm prepared for it. That will not stop me. And your family will say, it's the least you can do. Right? So it's, and we have lost that. Look at how we in the West are treating our kids. They should not suffer at all. They should not have no pain, right? And we don't want them to feel any discomfort. And we go to school and we yell at the teachers for correcting their children because my kid is always right. His feelings are so important, right? We need to learn from the Jewish culture and kind of see what they're doing. They build successful humans. We don't. And especially where we are now, I think this is also why I find it interesting to talk about at this point, because our culture is at a tipping point where nothing good is kind of like, in her horizon, because we are doing so many weird things. We have lost connection with our history. Most young people today, I think that this is common in most of the Western world. They have no understanding of history. They don't care. They think the world was invented when they were born. Everything before they were born, it's like, meh. If a Jew tries that, we need it. We need that framework. We need the understanding, right? So try to basically bring up your kids closer to what the Jews are doing. They need a sense of history. They need a sense of who they are as a family, their ancestors, their culture. You know, the successes of their family, of their country. They need to feel that pride. They need to see that they're part of something. So setting big goals isn't part of building a sense of purpose. You're not doing it just for yourself, right? You're doing it to make a difference. And it will mirror back to your family, to your community, all of that. Right? And then you will have the strength and you have the willingness to endure whatever it takes to get there. And once you get there, the job is not done. Then it's about helping others to climb the mountain as well. Right? When we're just like me, we disconnect from all of that. And it's not fulfilling. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of leaders and extremely wealthy, successful people over the years. Most feel empty and sad, not fulfilled, no purpose, because they like this. They did it for themselves. Nobody cares. They don't have a system. They don't have that context. Right? Successful people that are happy have people in their lives who knew them before they became successful. Relate to them as a person, hold them responsible, hold them accountable, right? And they will then mirror back their success, and they will often then be part of their community and help and stimulate. They use what they've learned to help others. So many people in our culture, because it's just me, they don't have that and they don't care. So they just like do drugs and party and buy 5 yachts and all of that. And it's not fulfilling. As a life form, we're supposed to work together. The person who kills, the big mammoth is supposed to bring it back to the tribe. Not to eat himself to death by himself. Right? And so, again, this is what we've lost. This is why, in many ways, the Jewish culture contains a blueprint that we can learn from and that we need to be inspired by. Any more questions?
First, a reminder to everyone in the studio is to raise your hand so that the microphone guy, because there's a question over here, Rick, or Leanna. He was before Leanna. But also from us here, we wanted to ask, one of the reasons that we chose a more sort of alternative spiritual path is that sense of the weight of tradition, memories, conflict, and all of that comes with religions. And we wonder, is it possible to sort of learn from the Jewish experience and find a common purpose without conflict, without history, without the memories and the weight?
Yes and no. The thing is, it happens once you realize, oh, I'm on a journey that's been going on for many lifetimes. Right? And then you connect to your own history as you. And you start seeing kind of your own history and your own pathways and how you have unfolded and what you've learned. You say, oh, wow, that's a big investment. I better not waste my time. Right? So yes, with expansion of consciousness comes a stronger sense of purpose and direction and why you are here. Right? You are not here to fulfill your needs or stimulate your ego. It's not why you're here. That is what happens when we have a lack of proper framework. This is also why you see that, because back to how humans have survived, it's the balance between the individual wanting to do his thing, because then you can specialize, right? Then you can become a really good hunter or a warrior, whatever. But it's also having the collective responsibilities. Throughout history, there's always been a balance between that. right? And when we disconnect from half of our existence, we become extremely self-centered and destructive. Okay, I'm just doing me now. Like, no, you're not. You're doing your ego. Who you are is a combination of the collective and the individual. We need that. But looking at your journey spiritually, and you also begin to connect to life around you, right? For your brain, it's very much the same experience as connecting to a family. You understand, oh, it's not just me, I'm connected. Everything I do has consequence. I'm being influenced, I'm exchanging, right? I'm in this dialogue with life all the time. So then it goes from the, what we call the horizontal history, right? In that framework, as we've been talking about, into a more spiritual one. But that context is even greater. And you then understand, oh, right, my sense of freedom was off because that's the illusion in the ego. Actually, freedom is me being able to operate in harmony with life. Being able to be productive in this kind of like concert with life as an organism. So freedom is being really good at being you and making that useful for life. So that often also translates into you becoming more productive in life, also as a human being. Because you then recognize, I have an obligation. It's not just me, I'm a part of life. I'm a cell in this organism. When I do whatever I want, it's just the ego. I'm actually a problem. I'm out of harmony. And whatever I do then is just garbage. It has to come from life. So, it means often when we as humans are part of these more horizontal contexts, we develop the skills, right, to also connect spiritually once we get there. But in that like in-between state, it's just like a teenager, right? You grow up in a family, there are rules and obligations and expectations. And then, late teens, early 20s, you're just doing you, and just being full of yourself, because that's also how you explore who you are and find out your stuff. But then you have to connect yourself to the real world and become productive and responsible based on what you figured out, right? So it's completely natural to also go through phases in our own spiritual evolution where it's just like full of ourselves. So we go into the ego completely to explore that perspective, because we need that also to understand who we are, right? But it comes a time when we then have to go back to the adult world and become productive with it. So we often go back and forth between these different states. More questions? Mm-hmm.
Yep, we've got a question from the audience.
Yes. So I'm sold. I want purpose. I don't want community.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried to create both, failed several times. My question is, I guess I understand some of it intellectually, but I was wondering if you can break it down like super basic and something that I can kind of do every day or every week to kind of try and build this sense of purpose in my mind.
Yeah.
And also when trying to create communities, holding each other accountable and that sort of thing, it tends to kind of fall apart pretty easily for me personally. And I don't have this Jewish super intelligence, so please make it super, super simple.
Yes.
And like something I can follow
Sure.
every day and
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The thing is that it's difficult to create, because then you have an option. When it comes to these frameworks, like the Jewish culture, it's not like you have a choice. There's no way out. Right? If you're born a Jew, you're a Jew. And it comes with everything. There's no way out. So often when we try to emulate it, it doesn't work, because you can just stop. You can't stop being a Jew. Right? And that's also the wonderful thing about it. So we have to belong to something greater than ourselves. We can't create it. We can't force it, because often, like the organisms that become spaces and cultures, it happens because it kind of becomes alive. You can't construct it. So, number one, it is having people in your life, not individual people, but groups. This is also why I often say more people should go to church. It's like most people, they need that. They need an overarching space where they are not in charge, where you don't have a choice. Family has always been that. Your tribe has always been that. The greater community has always been that. It's how we have survived. So it's part of our brain. And we recognize when we are doing something good, something great for our group. We feel fulfilled because we're hardwired to feel that way. So when we just follow whatever we want to do, we're supposed to feel, I'm doing something wrong now. Because you can do something that you want to do, but it should always be connected to the benefit of their group. Right? So it's that. You need to belong to a group. For some people, it can actually also be get to know your fucking family. You know, so many people on a spiritual path, they feel, I don't fit in. You chose to incarnate with them. It's still part of your space, right? I've actually advised many people to look at their family tree, just for fun. Investigate. There may be some surprises, and you may see that, yeah, I'm the product of this. This is actually also me. And it's interesting to look at, to get also that, context that history can give you, and that identity, and say, what is this? All these people done? What were their lives? And see that, yeah, your body as a vehicle is the product of that. So that can also help. But building family, building community is extremely important. And this is also what we're doing in this work that we're building together, is to also achieve that. Is to achieve a community and culture where the foundation and the context and the value systems are so clear that we begin to hold each other accountable, that we can't just get away with things, because that is the wonderful thing about that type of context. There are certain standards, and you'll be addressed, right? If you are kind of sliding off, because it's not productive, based on best practices. So it's very difficult just to construct, right? So it has to be, when we belong to something, this is also why people find a cause, right? They can become part of an organization, politically, environment, whatever it is. Sometimes people can find it just with people with the same interest. Sports club, it's the same thing. It's that feeling of togetherness and that we understand each other. We share values. It becomes a tribe because we are hardwired to belong to a tribe or several. So that is one way in learning how to kind of build that in your own life. But you can't just take individual people who are really bad at it, place them in a room and think, now we're a tribe. It doesn't work. You need people who are actually good at it. So that's one thing. Purpose, as I say, is always what happens in the brain when you are taking part in something greater than yourself. When you, in those actions, those behaviors are selfless. And it's basically, think of less self, right? And more beyond your self-interest. And this is also why we have this thing when it comes to discipline, which is really interesting. Because most people can, they can hate and love it at the same time. Right? Because we know that when we discipline ourselves to achieve something greater, and we're actually doing it, we will all feel so proud. We'll feel so good about ourselves. But until we do, we'll hate discipline. It's always kind of learning how to get into a state of purpose. It is never what is self-fulfilling. Never. It is always doing something connected to a greater cause. It can even be helping someone else. Right? Making a difference beyond you. And there are thousands, millions of ways of doing this. But when we want to live a purposeful life, it is learning to care less about our own needs and wants and more about those of others. And figuring out how can I make someone else's life better, right? How can I make life in general better? How can I change the world? How can I be part of whatever is beyond me? Right? And this is what we all need to find. And we can find many different ways to do that. But our brain chemistry will change. Because then we are truly a productive human. We are actually taking part in the survival of the group. And that is, in the most simple sense, this is what purpose is. This is what is in us genetically. And again, what we're doing wrong today, or like in a very unproductive way in our civilization, is that we've forgotten about this. Right? And now it's just about whatever we can get away with. And that will make us all depressed and self-destructive. So we need to address those attitudes and behaviors in ourselves. And also then seek to be with people with clear values. Most people who claim they're kind of breaking the rules, they're simply not able to follow them. To break the rules, you need to be able to follow them first. Right? In art, everybody knows this. First you have to learn the technique. Those are the rules, right? And you'll be whipped into submission. No matter if it's painting or ballet or whatever it is, you have to follow the rules because you have to internalize them first. Once they are internalized, then you break them. Not a second before. And as often it's up to whoever is training you, to basically, now you're ready. Because you can see when the rules are internalized, then you can break them. Most people today are not doing that. They're just full of themselves. Well, I cannot be myself because of, and it's not productive. It's only productive when you first understand the rules. So this also when do not be around people who are not displaying any aim or direction or purpose or kind of the willingness to find purpose, with no sense of value, no ethics, that are self-centered and just full of themselves. It's like, don't be around them. Choose people where you see that they are behaving naturally from a place in themselves where they hold themselves accountable. And one way you can see it is very simple. Do they have long-term goals they are trying to achieve? The thing is, when we are used to as short-term gratification, we have dreams. We have fantasies. That's not goals. And today we often, mistake one for the other. The thing is, when you have an idea or a dream and you don't have a concrete plan and strategy, then interpret it into concrete actions that you're doing every day, you got nothing. It's just wishful thinking. So, one way to understand if someone, a person is of kind of quality, look at their long-term goals. What is it that they want to achieve long-term, which is beyond the instant gratification? That is always a giveaway. Because if you have a long-term goal, you need the, methodology. You need the discipline. You need the selflessness. You need to decide, this is greater than me. This is greater than my needs right now. And when people have that, they will also express it in other spaces. It's more easy for people trying to achieve long-term goals to also display purpose, to also not be self-obsessed in other spaces, because it becomes part of your personality. So, to me, this is the easiest way we can decide who should we kind of have in our lives. Talk about long-term goals and how they are moving towards them. And also hold yourself accountable. If you do not have long-term goals in life, well, you're not worth it either. Again, we need to understand that our current culture is not a good one. And there are no adults around, with a few exceptions. We need to grow the fuck up. And we need to look at this, also why the Jews are the adults in the room. They relate to the hardships of life. It's in their culture. How to survive, how to reach long-term, like all of that. Try to look at them as that mirror. They have figured out survival. And they've proved it. Right? As a culture, they've gone through more than any other culture. And they're still kicking ass. Right? In Germany, they tried to kill all of them, and still you find them in every top position in the world. Right? You can't get rid of them. Like, we can learn and use the example and see what can we do in our own lives. But holding ourselves accountable, setting long-term goals, accepting that pain is part of life, learning from your own history, learning from pain, like, what do I need to do differently? Because that's survival. What we often do in the West, we just whine about it. Oh, my feelings, oh, this happened to me, and then we just play the victim. Right? The better way to do it, like, okay, we can mourn and we can feel our feelings, fine. It doesn't change the fact that we have to keep going. We have to keep building. We have to learn from this and get stronger. Right? When you let yourself be consumed by your pain, my answer to that is you haven't had enough of it. As I said, once you have a lot of pain over a long time, you can either let it consume you or you will start cutting through the crap. You'll get stronger. You will not waste your energy. You will be better at decision making, like all of that. That's how we learn. That's how we can also see that someone has learned from their past. They become more direct. They have more sense of both purpose and direction. They're able to operate in a world that is not just about them, which means also they've disciplined their feelings and emotions. Right? So it's all of this, but we need to practice. It doesn't just happen. Again, they've been doing it as a culture for a very long time. We have been losing it for decades, for several generations, and we keep getting worse. We have to get back to classic values and then reinterpret them based on what it means to be a human now. Right? But they're simply just this excellent mirror. Doesn't mean that we should be like them, but we can see their strategies. Right? And we can see, how can I incorporate that kind of way of being, that way of thinking, those strategies in my own life. Right? And then we can just practice.
We have a question from the audience.
Well, thank you. This is really interesting. I guess in trying to think about how to avoid some of the pitfalls of being part of that group, there's a really interesting podcast this week, the New York Times, which went back to 1948 and was looking at the formation of Israel and the formation of the Palestinian state, and how each side has its own narration of what happened and version of reality. And this journalist went back and through a lot of research has uncovered how both stories are really full of a lot of errors that have been perpetuated and so forth. And that it was funny because he kind of said it's a competition of two groups of people fighting over land, and they're fighting over who has the greater victim story. And so how do you avoid that? In the crystals teachings that we're working on, one of the things that you've been talking to us about is the importance of letting go of old beliefs, of letting go of assumptions, of getting rid of old baggage. Can you link those together for me?
Yes. Now, once we begin the journey towards awakening, it's a very different journey, right? But it means you also need to master horizontal survival, which is what we've been talking about, is how to survive as a life form, as a person. Spiritual survival, however, is something else. And often what will help us survive as a human will not help us expand spiritually, right? And expanding spiritually is, to me, being able to incorporate both, right? But people have often then just let go of the human side because it's too difficult to combine both. I say, like, well, that's how you really get success, because you need to be able to show every expansion you have spiritually in your horizontal life, and you need to get the results. So it's that. So letting go of the past is learning from it, and then extract what are the tools, what are the insights, what are the principles, because then you can apply it. But the thing is, horizontally, the brain does not necessarily work that way in the human kind of life form. It understands everything through narrative. It's how we understand what something is. It's not just by observing that object, but it's the story and the explanation, right? Those are the narratives. So once you have a long history, a lot of things are then being told, and you believe them, it becomes like, that is how you will interpret your own existence and then understand what to do. But there's a limit to how far that can get you. But today, what we're talking about today is that most people in general have lost this too, which means they're not even able to do the first step, because you need to be really good at this to expand spiritually, right? Otherwise, if you think of, like, I often talk about the horizontal and the vertical being kind of the spiritual movement upwards. To do that, you need a pretty strong foundation. Otherwise, you'll just fall over. So, if you can think of the ideal shape being a pyramid, right? Or you need to be able to be present in this world, and you need a very strong and big foundation, which means you have to embrace life. You have to kind of master also being human. Otherwise, when you start moving upwards and you build, if your foundation is too narrow, you will fall over. And this is what happens often when people go into spirituality without mastering their lives, right? They try to lift, but they fall over because they do not have the foundation. So learning how to do both means that, you move up and you also build the foundation. So it's basically as wide as you're tall, right? That's the ideal balance. So we have both to study how to make the most out of our human journey, because in that we will find spiritual principles that we can practice that will also in turn help us move vertically. But the two perspectives are slightly different, and it's just interesting because this is part of what I teach, is how to work with both of these formats. And it's really fascinating once you understand that the true spiritual journey is a combination, right? It's the whole thing. That's the true expansion. Anyone else?
Yes, we have a question in the audience.
It's not easy because I'm not good in yeah. I'm an old teacher, taking care of children and people all my life. And I'm so, what should I? Yeah, all right. Because this is very, very important for me. Listening to you, I think I understand a lot about the children and how we we take care of them the wrong way. We are not giving them the platform, and I'm I have thought a lot about how can this end. These children, so they are used to have everything before they think that they need anything. And yeah, and I know as well as I have been a part of that. And the verse is that all I have tried to done, it's a lot of things, but I understand that I thought I did it for them. But to be honest, I think I have done it for myself, because it's so good when you give something to some who want it. And
Yes.
so no, I feel that you have turned down my life.
Good.
Yes,
That's,
thank you.
That's my profession. Now, but what you're bringing up is really important, because it's, yes, seeing what we've done in the West, thinking that giving someone what they want is the best thing. But remember, as I said, the needs are basically repeating where you are, because those are the needs you know. Not getting what you want will make you stretch and figure out, how can I get something? And you will discover something else, right? It's like going, you want ice cream, right? And you go into an ice cream parlor and they don't have what you think you want, because you've figured out what you like. And then because they don't have it, you pout and you complain, but then, okay, guess I'll have this then. And it turns out to be a lot better than your favorite. It's your new favorite. And it's that. When we get what we think we want, we will always repeat. And yes, in the West, we've done so many weird things when it comes to basically producing entitled children and entitled adults by giving them what they want, instead of showing them that we are part of something greater. There are obligations. There are cultures and ways to do things, and we need to work together to achieve greatness. You can't achieve greatness out of thin air, right? Again, look at how people feel completely disconnected today, right? And they do not feel a sense of purpose, and it also means that we self-medicate so much more because we don't feel anything. When we're part of a culture, we feel that we belong, that we're connected, we're part of something, right? And in the West, we have emphasized the individual to the extent of basically exterminating context. And it's extremely harmful. And how that will end is that it will be corrected. One of the ways it's being corrected is through the Muslim culture. They carry a lot of the same values. It's family, it's community, it's holding each other accountable. They have a lot of rules. But when you're not able to act from consciousness, when you have insight, you understand what is productive. In a low level of consciousness, you don't. So you do what you're told, and that will actually help you until you've outgrown it. Back to what you talked about, you need to internalize the rules first, and then you break them. Then you can reinvent everything, but most people are not there. So classic values are better. And we see also a wave today in the West where kind of classic values are coming back, where people are talking more about it. And also when it comes to like gender roles and all of that, we have both the explosion of 400 different genders, and then we also have the other movement of people going back to more traditional roles. To me, it's just like there's room for everything, because it's just us exploring our own journeys. But in general, when we look at human culture, human survival all over the world, there are certain things everyone can agree upon. When we look at history, what has actually worked? I think, again, for people to be able to rely on you, that's a value that we all can agree upon. Like, do what you have agreed to do. right? And respect other people. Again, try to go beyond your own needs. It's like there are so many values that all cultures would agree upon, and it's going back to those. And see, yeah, this is actually how we become a productive human being. Back to your question, it will correct itself, but it also means that the Western culture will have to be transformed, and it will happen over time because the Western culture will in many ways die, and it will kind of melt into more, you can call it conservative cultures that will then start to influence. So it will kind of, the Western culture will turn into something else. But right now we see that the Western culture is dissolving before our very eyes, and it's lack of this, right? When there's no sense of identity, purpose, direction, no culture, no one is accountable for anything, no framework, no consequences, all of that, of course everything dissolves. It's not a free-for-all, it's destructive. And we think that is freedom. And it's not. As I say, freedom is being an expert. Freedom is when you have internalized the rules to the level where you can break them. That is freedom, and not before.
Yes, we have a fun comment from Sara on YouTube. She works with nutrition and notices that one of the fascinating things about Jewish culture is that ability they have to cultivate great quality food in tough environments with limited resources, and then comments on the sort of the juxtaposition of living here in Norway, where we have a long culture of also sort of poverty and lack of resources, but whereas the Jewish culture has been innovative and creative and come up with really great solutions, the Norwegian culture rather insists on poverty, and even now in abundance in the modern age just keeps repeating patterns of poverty in our food in other ways. So that was just a fun comment that Sarah threw in. And then we have a question from Jim.
I would like to comment on that.
Okay.
When you look at the Scandinavian countries, like especially when you look at Norway, okay, coast, it's very isolated. It's the opposite of the Jewish culture. Now, when you talk about creativity, right, is basically trying to find new pathways, trying to figure out how to survive, trying new things. And when that's part of the culture, whatever happens, you will try to make the best out of it. You will invent, you will innovate, you will do that, all of that. Now, when you have a country that's basically, it's just water around it, and then you have a neighboring country that is basically just the same. So, it means you're stuck. You're in a box. So whatever happens there, well, that's how life is, right? So you feel that you can't really do anything about it. How much can you invent with potato, right? It's that. So you don't pick up a lot of influences because you're just there. So then you just become used to things happening, and then say, well, I guess that's life, and then you just suffer. You don't use that suffering to move forward, like to be creative, because you're stuck. It requires movement. This is part of survival, right? That you're willing to change and do something else. And in nature, that often means also to move physically, right? And the Jews have been migrating all over. So they've been absorbing kind of flavor from everywhere and become really good at that kind of innovation and making the best out of it. In the Scandinavian cultures, like whatever something else, well, that's what it is, right? Until recently, it's interesting because Norway used to be like a fishing superpower. It was all about fish. They were probably the only country in the world that did not know how to prepare fish. They would they would boil fish. Nobody does that, right? It's that mentality, but it comes from being stuck. Countries that are in the middle of things, so people travel through, they learn things. So it's when you have more of that movement energy, right, you will learn more. You will become much more creative. So Norwegians began becoming a lot more creative when immigrants came to the country, right? Norwegians owe everything to immigrants because now Norwegians even understand how to prepare fish. Wonderful.
Okay, so then we also had a very beautiful sharing from a woman in Germany about having a boss in the United States who was Jewish born in Germany, survived the concentration camp, and invited her to an evening at his house in Beverly Hills. So we can all picture it. It's excellent food. He's playing the piano, great conversations. There's a Nobel Prize winner, James Watson, available. Atmosphere is wonderful. Then he starts playing German folk songs from back during the war and that kind of thing. And she has this very nostalgic memory, but also this very powerful connection to him as a role model. And it connects then with a question from Caroline, also in Germany, about if we don't have long-term goals and if we struggle to create them. I mean, everything that happened that evening required so much of everybody to learn the piano, to learn to cook, to win a Nobel Prize. Like, how do we create and connect with those long-term goals if we're struggling with that aspect of tonight's teaching?
Thank you so much for sharing this, because this is exactly what we're talking about. And how to connect with long-term goals. We need to change the mindset. I often talk about this, that modern people, especially in our culture, see themselves as consumers and customers in their own lives. We all walk around like Karens and basically just demand things. And we expect that the world will give it to us. We're so entitled, right? And when something doesn't work, we blame the world. We expect people to see us, to understand us, and to give us things because we're worth it. And we need to let that go. When we then realize that, oh, I'm not actually a customer. This is me on my path. I have to do it. I have to create it. Because it's like, in this culture, we have been brainwashed into believing that we are consumers. Right? Just think of everything in our civilization now is about people being consumers. And that will block us from having long-term goals, because why should we? We can just buy it. Or it should just happen by itself. It's an illusion. Because short-term feelings and satisfactions are extremely addictive. So we need to connect with the fact that I'm not a consumer. Whatever I do to satisfy my short-term needs, it's not what life is about. So it takes a bit of work to kind of like work our way out of this brainwashing. Right? Again, when the Jews relate to a history of several thousand years, and that's kind of what they are seeing. And in our culture, we really don't care about what happened a couple of days ago, because now I'm just, it's that. We need to train ourselves. So, one exercise is basically sit down and say, okay, if I'm not a consumer, if I'm not a customer, and I take away everything in my life that I can buy, everything that I think should be there, that other people should do for me, everything I think I'm entitled to, and see myself as the creator. And I incarnate to build and walk my path. Then what? What would fulfill me then? So we need to connect with the more kind of existential question, because the short-term ones is just how to survive today. It's like, where will my next meal come from? And genetically, what is kind of like so difficult about it is that when it comes to the priority in the brain, of course, finding food is number one, right? Finding water, also, that's probably number one, and food number two, is always like these short-term things that will help you survive now. Those will have to be satisfied before you can have long-term goals. That's how we operate genetically. It takes culture to change it. Endurance is basically when your long-term goals will mean more to you than the short-term ones, because otherwise, well, I don't have food, so I guess I can't. Endurance is, no, I will keep going. I will not stop, because this is more important. So we also learned as humans over time, for instance, when there were difficult times and we have to migrate, right? When we started moving, then we learned the long-term goals over the short-term satisfaction. Right, so it's in us, but we have to practice because we're completely brainwashed by big corporations at this point, with the help of ourselves, right? We're not being difficult subjects, but we are the solution. It's basically, we have to take a look at ourselves in our own lives and say, am I going to live as a consumer, only concerned about what should I buy next, or what should someone be giving me because I did deserve it? Is this really what my life is? For many people, that is actually their lives. And we need to look at this and no. If I want to achieve something, that can only be achieved through long-term goals. If I want to be someone, that requires me to develop myself. It doesn't happen just because I want to. Right? And in that consumer thing, there's so many people today, they think they deserve simply because they're worth it. They don't think they should be working for it. We need to change the psychology. I think we also need to help each other through conversation, right? We need to confront ourselves and each other. So we are able to set long-term goals. And basically, you know, when I work with people, setting long-term goals is also about who do you want to be? When you look at yourself, who do you want to be? What do you want to represent in the world? Right? Many people can make up a fantasy of like their imprint on life. Oh, I'm so great. But as often, who you are is who you are by yourself when nobody's watching. Most people do not really do anything. They just sit there. Unless they're consuming, they just sit there. This is who you are. You want greatness? Do you want to reach your potential? Do you want something more for you than just being a consumer waiting for death? Then you need that framework. You need to seek it, you need to build it. It doesn't happen. Our culture is harmful. And this is kind of like each and every one of us will have to confront ourselves. We have to become our own Jewish family. You know, and we have to kind of learn that and support each other. But it takes conversation because it's very difficult. As we need to sit by ourselves and confront ourselves, and then we just, next day we do the same thing all over again. We need to allow for people to confront us. Right? We need to support, we need to nurture, but we need to hold each other accountable for stepping out of the bullshit of short-term gratification, because that is harmful. Short-term gratification is just drugs. It's not productive. You are consuming. You are not, what you are supposed to produce in life is greatness. It's excellence. It doesn't matter what you do. This is what we see in the Jewish culture. No matter what they do, they go to the top. It doesn't matter what you do. It's the principle of excellence. It's reaching the fucking top of the mountain. Doesn't matter which mountain it is. Right? And as I always say, the only correct answer when asked, why do you go to the top? The only correct answer is because it's there. This is who we need to become. And in this culture, the current culture, we all start to believe that the top of the mountain should come to me, because why should I do all that work? It's harmful, and it's also why our culture is falling apart. We need to grow an ethical backbone. We need to embrace moral behavior. And to me, moral behavior is simply that to live according to the value system. You need to become aware of what do you want to represent? What are your values? Are you living those values? Are you representing that in the world? Because if you represent them, it's how other people experience you. Otherwise, it's just a fantasy. Right? It's all of that. So again, it's not an easy fix, but where we are in our culture individually, we need to, get our act together. Even in spiritual work, right? Most of you will recognize, we're not quite there. We need to embrace the physical life. We need to stop being mindless consumers, and we need to connect to our journey. We need to be individuals who want to change the world, who pull the world forward. And we do that by becoming excellent, by becoming leaders. Again, so that we should really hope that Jews are running the world, because everything else is quite scary.
Yep, we have a question in the audience.
Yes, it's both to the comment by the teacher and something you said about the downfall of Europe. As I put it out on LinkedIn yesterday, very close to what you said, and I got a lot of response from other countries, but nothing from Norway that I've seen so far. So it's kind of interesting that when we touch upon these greater themes, what you might call grand strategy, then there's not that much interest in Norway. And I hear something that speaks to what you've spoken about today's, or the current generation coming up, or whatever, that's all about me and me realization, that the current generation coming through, the younger kids, they haven't learned to behave. They haven't learned to respect authority in any fashion. and it's like they have to learn the basics the first few months before they can even behave in the classroom, not the few rogue people who never grasp that, but it's a common thing, and it's a movement in the wrong direction. So how can we turn the conversation from this room to the greater parts of society, and let's limit it to Norway? How could that happen?
Well, as I always say, we have to set the example, right? To me, we're only credible if we live it. It doesn't matter what you believe if you are not living it. Right? To me, no matter what you believe, no matter what you practice, something happens when you walk the talk, when that is a value, because then you hold yourself accountable. So always being aware that we should be role models, even when we are by ourselves, because you also have to show yourself. Always set the example, always try to be the solution. No matter where we are, always look at where I'm at, how can I do this better? We can always do better, no matter where we are, no matter the circumstance. We can always stretch. And that needs to become a goal, a long-term goal, that we should always do better. There's always room for improvement. We can always, go one more inch. Make an effort. Right? Perfection is a lot of very small things done right. It's not just like one thing. It's this understanding that it's all over. It's making an effort. It's always trying to stretch beyond your current level. But when it comes to conversation with others, to me, it's be an example, right? Be an example of the values you hold dear. And try to become aware of your values, because that can be translated into behavior and action. You need to become aware of who do you want to be, what do you want to represent in the world. And how should that kind of impact the world in a positive, productive way. That is part of being in a state of purpose. As I said, when it comes to young people, over the next few generations, this will be slowly corrected, because a civilization cannot survive this way. But we're now at the point where other cultures are starting to kind of flow in and take over. So that will happen. And we will see more of the return to kind of classic values, but still interpreted based on where we are now historically. Just like we will go back in time, because we are always moving forward. But it's something about our Western culture lacking a kind of foundation, and thereby also legitimacy, as a space for developing human potential. As I said, if we don't have a foundation, what we grow vertically is just fluff. It will fall over. And we see that in so many people's lives now, right? And they can just keep themselves up through self-medication and denial of reality, right? And it's not healthy.
Our last question comes from Linetta on YouTube. In many human spiritual traditions, suffering is seen as a path to spiritual transformation. But her question is suffering the only path for the human life form to develop intelligence, resilience, and creativity?
If you are in a horizontal consciousness, meaning that you've not started the process of becoming aware of yourself, right? And you've not started the spiritual opening, yes, it is the only way. Because it's only discomfort, as we talked about, discomfort, pain, suffering, that will force you to adapt to change. You would not adapt to change if you were comfortable and happy. Then you will repeat. Horizontally, you will just keep repeating. So you need that to say, I don't want to be here, so I should move. This is not working, so I have to learn something new. It's the only way, as long as you're in the strict kind of biological consciousness. So yes, it will bring you to the starting point of spiritual awakening. But once you begin your spiritual awakening, you can grow out of suffering. This is also, as you all know, it's part of what I teach, how to get by that, because you don't need it anymore. Your resistance, which is karma, is what produces suffering, right? That you are shown a potential, and then from that moment on, that kind of vibration of that potential and where you are at will vibrate differently. And then you will believe that you're attacked, or you'll feel that resistance. And the suffering is then experiencing that, creating the story about how unfair this is or how terrible it is, instead of moving towards the potential, which you will be doing after you've been fighting yourself to basically sleep or exhaustion, and then you will kind of slowly be moving. With a spiritual awakening, we begin with the potential. That's what we learn. We begin to see, what is life showing me? Where does life want to move me? Because that is my next step. So we learn to, instead of being in resistance, we learn to look at the potential and we just go for it, because we've suffered enough. We've suffered throughout our whole evolution, and we can start seeing it. And we see that every time I suffer, no matter what happens, I end up in the potential. It just takes a lot more time and effort and screaming and yelling and whining. And I can skip that. So we learn that once life shows us a potential, it's game over. We just go there. We just try to figure out how to get there. right? This is also being intelligent and using our creativity. And just try to figure out how to get there with the least amount of suffering. What the Jewish culture has done is that they have incorporated the suffering, right? But they don't stop. So they can say, yeah, we feel all this suffering, but back to work, right? And this is also what we can learn as humans. Yeah, we can have resistance. Yes, we can feel pain. We can think it's very unfair, but we keep going because we understand that we have to go there. Right? Basically, God is in our potential. Right? So whenever we move towards a potential, we're also moving towards the divine, because every time we grow, we expand spiritually. Right? So it's learning how to deal with this. But over time, as a result of spiritual awakening, we stop the suffering part. We just like jump right in. And then we can achieve a different form of happiness and balance and harmony, because we're not screaming anymore. We understand that life actually wants us to unfold. Life wants us to reach all our potentials. So we do that. So we collaborate. And again, we experience this connectedness, this kind of sense of family, this sense of kind of logic and purpose, because we now relate to nature, to life, as our family, as the context, and we can see the movements in nature, we can see the movements in ourselves, and what we have, the kind of framework and that connectedness that we've had through the human journey, we now have through the spiritual one. This is also how they connect, because it means the more connectedness we can see and understand, the human part of us will feel fulfilled, will feel comfortable, because it's logical. And it can then trigger the same kind of response as the person would experience in more of that kind of Jewish context. But we now get it in that freedom of working directly with nature. But you need a strong foundation, right? I've seen so many times also people trying to grow spiritually, and they have basically been in denial of their life. And it gets to a certain point, and they just fall over. And then they go into these habits and behaviors that are quite unsavory, because, yeah, you had no foundation there. So now we fall flat on our face, having to live through all of that mess and suffering until you figure it out. Because we need that foundation. So building this in ourselves, learn from the Jewish culture and how they have done it. Try to learn best practices in principle, and see how can we develop this by ourselves, but also together, right? Nobody grows in a vacuum. We all depend on each other, right? And we need to understand this also in our part of the world, that just doing things by ourselves, it is half of it. We can only grow truly in collaboration with others. It's when you make other people grow that you grow yourself, right? This is also why, as we know, the greatest gift is giving. It's a cliche, but it's true. So we need to emphasize that side of life a lot more, because as consumers, we just go into the ego and we basically turn off our own light. When we give, when we are attracted to purpose, and when we really emphasize that side of life, our light will increase. I can basically, when I walk down the street, I can see the people who are more giving. I can, like, they have an expanded light compared to other people. Being self-centered turns your light off, and you can feel it. It's empty, so you consume more. Right? This is our culture right now. We have to wake up. So do whatever you can in your own life, right? And try to find inspiration from the Jewish culture, right? Over time, you know, yes, right now in Israel, things are happening. That will pass. Look at it. We're all dealing with our karma. That's violent. You know, it's just how it is. But look at kind of the template and be inspired by it. Lift yourself, lift others. truly work on long-term goals, decide that short-term suffering or pain to achieve long-term goal is absolutely worth it every time, because it is. Right? Try to be an example. Represent your values and stick by them. Like, become a person that other people can relate to. Right? It's about holding yourself accountable and all of that. Who you are in the world matters. But it only matters for real when you go past the self. Right? So always try to be there for others. Be there. Find a cause if you need it. Embrace the togetherness and kind of look at how the individual strategies in your life has gone too far. In our community, we are really emphasizing kind of building community, building context, building all of this, because again, even in a spiritual journey, even if it's just you can't do it by yourself. It's also part of understanding that the solutions to how to bring this planet into balance is for all of us to go beyond our own needs, to connect with something greater, and to live from that perspective. We all have it in us. You can reach all your potentials. You can reach excellence. You can achieve anything you set your mind to. Anything. It just takes strategies, right? It takes behaviors. It takes decisions. It takes values. It takes practices. It's all of that. But each and every one of us have unlimited potential, unlimited resources in us. And it's our own responsibility to figure out how to kind of maximize that journey. And the best mirror you can possibly use is the Jewish culture.
Thank you, IKYA. Thank you all for joining us tonight for IKYA Live and World News from the Spiritual Perspective. Remember, if you want to contribute to healing the situation in Israel and Palestine, share this conversation with others. Bring this discussion forth to assist others in lifting their own consciousness. Share this conversation also to heal your own community, your own family. The ideas we discussed here tonight are extremely powerful. So we warmly, strongly encourage you to like this episode, share it on with other spiritual seekers, family, friends, and then join us next week, next Monday, 19 o'clock Oslo time, for our next episode of IKYA Live. And also a warm shout out that we're in our last day before you have to wait another 6 months to study directly with IKYA as a spiritual student. IKYA Mantra Collection 5 is our newest course where you use mantra to meditate and to study spiritual principles. That course, we're going to have to close enrollment after our workshop tomorrow, so it's not too late to join. If you have any questions, email us at info@ikya.org or go to our website, ikya.org, to check it out and sign up. Otherwise, that's it from our studio here at IKYA Center in Oslo, Norway, and we look forward to seeing you at IKYA Live next Monday.